Welcome back to episode 6 of the Python for Beginners tutorial series. In this video, we're going to go through functions and classes. This is the last lesson episode, so let's just get right into it.
What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be going through functions and classes. So let's currently take a look at this code. It looks like a mess. We are using the same chunks of code multiple times in a row. So if we need to reuse it somewhere else in the program, we're going to have to copy these 5, which is going to be a problem, right? It's going to clutter up our code and it's not going to look nice. So to solve this problem, what we can do is maybe put in a while loop, since we are repeating it 3 times. Or a better solution, we can put it in a function. So let's just go ahead and make some space over here. A function starts off with the def keyword for define. So since we are calculating the factorial, we're going to call it def factorial. And if you have multiple words in your function, you would put an underscore between it. That's according to PEP8 standards. So just for now, let's leave that blank and we'll put a colon there and make a new line. So notice how we put indentation here to tell Python, hey, all the code under here is going to be a part of this factorial function. So let's go ahead and just copy this for now and paste it into here. Again, remember to indent. And let's see what happens currently when we run these three segments over here. So let's save and run. And you can see how it says the factorial of 5 is 120, the factorial of 4 is 24, and the factorial of 3 is 6, which is all true. So what we want to do is replace as much of this code as possible and really follow dry. Don't repeat yourself. So let's just try working with this, the factorial of 3. So let's go ahead and delete this. So what is a function? Well, like in math, a function can take an input and it will return an output. So when it comes to coding, a function just does something. It doesn't necessarily need an input, and it won't necessarily give out an output. But it's supposed to do something and supposed to minimize the amount of lines of code that you're writing. So let's try writing factorial here for now and see what happens. So we'll clear this and let's run it. And you can see how it's still being written. Why? Because we just put this code segment here, and then we call the function afterwards. We call it calling because we are using this function over here. But let's say we want to replace all of these lines here, not just the factorial of 3. What can we do here? Well, inside of these brackets over here, you can notice how we're assigning the maximum value to num each time. So what can we do instead? Let's just delete all of this, and we can replace this num is equal to 3 with num here. This is called a parameter, and then we're going to pass in an argument over here. So for now, let's just put in 3. So again, this is a parameter. It's one of the inputs of the function, while this is an argument. It's what you pass into a parameter in the function. So let's follow this through. We have our num defined here, our product. We are going from 1 to num, and we are including num. That's our adding 1 to here. And then we have to assign the answer to the product. Here we can just remove this extra line of code. So hide the factorial of num is we can just put product. And let's see what happens when we just run this. So we can see how it says exactly the same thing. We didn't really change anything, and that's because we're passing this 3 in. And we can change this value. So let's say we change it to 5. You can see how it says the factorial of 5 is 120, which corresponds to this code over here. So very, very nice. So let's copy this and paste it multiple times. So we first calculated 5, then 4, then 3. And instantly our code is way more readable and way more concise, which is always better. Now if you noticed this top line over here, it didn't say hi, it said howdy before. We want to change this greeting. How do we do that? How do we change this hi? Well, of course, we could just put our greeting here, and we can also write like hi over here. But let's say we don't want to do that. We want to make the default hi, but we can change the greeting afterwards. So what we can do is put a conditional parameter. So conditional parameters can only go after normal parameters, the ones that must be filled in. So for our greeting, we could put the default to hi. That's how you set a greeting. You assign it in this place over here. And we'll just replace this area with the greeting. So now if we want to customize the greeting, what we do is we put a comma there, and then after we're done filling out all of our mandatory parameters, we fill out all of the conditional parameters. So the way we change these conditional parameters is by doing greeting is equal to, and then what do we want to change to? We want to change it to howdy. So let's run this again, and you can see how it's exactly identical to the first version of this program. Now, if you try changing things up and let's say putting the conditional parameters first and then the mandatory ones afterwards, you can see that Python's going to give you an error because positional arguments cannot appear after keyword arguments. So it has to be in this order. And if you don't include these mandatory arguments, then it's going to result in an error. It's missing one required positional argument num. So you have to make sure that you put it in the correct order and that you're filling out all the mandatory fields for the function. Okay, so that's great and all, but let's say we don't want to directly print this out in the function. Instead, we want to get a string back so that way we can print it out here just for some reason. Well, what we can do is we can use the return keyword. And that basically tells Python, hey, this is the output of the function. So output this, and that way when we print out the result of this function, it will print out the string. So if we run this function, you can see how nothing has really changed because we are getting these strings and we are printing them out in this function. So the return keyword is almost always used with a function. Now this is one way to write a factorial function, but there is another way to write a factorial function, and that's by using a technique called recursion. It's a very easy to implement technique. And basically what recursion means is that you call the function inside of itself. So how do we implement recursion here? So let's go through my proposed solution over here. As you can see, when we start over here, we provide the number and then an optional greeting. So if the original num is none, which we haven't provided over here, then original num is assigned by using num. And if num is equal to 0, the function stops calling itself and it returns the greeting, the factorial of original num is product. We want to keep track of original num because we're going to keep on running this function and passing in the original num, just so when we print this out, it doesn't say 0 when num eventually equals 0. So as you can see, we keep on running this function with the number being decreased by 1, the product being product times the num, the greeting being the greeting, and the original num being the original num. So this is recursion in a nutshell, and if we run this, you can see how it gives us our output. Before I stop talking about functions, I want to just mention one last thing, and that is lambda functions. So let's say we create our own functions like print message. Now, if we want to create a function that is just a single line, then what we can do is we can use the keyword lambda, and you can put in your input here. So let's say I want to put in our message. Then you put the colon here, and you put in whatever you want afterwards, and the lambda function returns that line. So print and then message. So let's just wrap this in an F string. So now let's try this out. So print message. So let's say we want to print hello. Let's save and run. You can see, hi, this is a message, hello. And you can also assign optional parameters. So message is equal to, let's say, howdy. So if you don't put anything here, then it will be optional. So again, this returns everything here. If you try putting the return keyword, it's going to result in an error. So Lambda functions, they're way less powerful, but they're one line. So in some cases, they can be very useful. Now let's talk about classes. You can think of classes like blueprints. There are some things that you can change, but overall it will have a couple of features that you can work with. So to create a class, use the class keyword and then just write in whatever you want. According to Pep 8, we have to start it off with the capital letter. So for this example, we're going to write vehicle because we're going to be making a class about vehicles. And let's do that. Now we're going to create something called a constructor using the def in it. And then let's just leave it like that for now. So a constructor is run whenever the class is run. So you'll see that in just a second. But for this vehicle, what are some properties that it should have? Well, let's just put self here for now. I'll talk about that in just a second. It should have the make, the model, and the year it was made. Now we will use self.make, assign it to make, and we'll do that for the rest. So as you can notice, I created one more variable over here using underscore mileage. This is a protected variable. We'll talk about that in just a second. But what this self is, this self dot, is it's a variable attached to the class. So when we create an instance of this class, which again, I will talk about in just a second, you will be able to access these variables. So now let's just add a function here real quick. And now let's create something called an instance. Okay, so what am I doing over here? Well, this is called an instance, and you can think of it as that customized blueprint. So we're using that blueprint and filling it with our information. So this is the make, the model, and then the year. And then we are creating a blueprint of that. So instead of having just a blueprint of a general vehicle, it's going to be the blueprint of something more specific. Now let's say we want to get more specific. Since vehicle, we can't really include things here that is just specific to like a car. So let's create our own class car. So class car, and then in these brackets over here, we are going to inherit. So you can think of it as being based off of that original blueprint, since cars are based on vehicles in general. So class car, and then let's make a constructor. And then we're going to use this super function dot underscore underscore init. And then pass in the year, the model, the make, the model, and the year. So now let's just fill in the rest of the variables. And now let's just create a few more functions just for this example. Okay, so now I've created this class car over here, and it takes the original class, which is vehicle here, and it inherits all of its properties. So what is this super function over here? Well, it runs the constructor of this class over here. It runs this init function, and it passes in the make, model, and year. And that way, when we use the functions in this vehicle, class will be able to, use it. So for example, let's create another drive function here. So def drive. And what we'll do is we'll do super. So that's how you access the parent class. Super dot drive and miles. So we're just going to put in miles here. Also self. And then, then we're going to put self.mileage plus equals miles. So now let's create an instance of the car. So car is equal to car. Let's say Honda. So Honda Accord 2018 red. So we've created an instance of the car. And now let's drive the car and the vehicle. So this car class will be more powerful since it has more functions than this vehicle class. So So let's drive forward. And now let's show our mileage. Okay, so let's just run this and figure out what's happening. So you can see how the vehicle mileage is 100 and the car mileage is 150. So what is going on over here? Well, we have this class vehicle over here, and we have this class car, and it's creating the class vehicle inside of the class car. So you can use some of those features there. What's happening is we are driving the vehicle, of course. So we are using the .drive function inside of the vehicle class, using the super keyword over here. And then we are also increasing our mileage with the miles. Now you might notice how we're using an underscore over here and no underscore over here. And that's because in other languages, there are private and public variables. So private variables are variables that you cannot access outside of the class, and they're usually there just for the inner calculations. So if you try messing with those variables, something wrong might happen with those calculations and you'll break the class. So in Python, we don't have public or private variables because by default, everything is public. You can change anything you want and you can read anything you want. But to signify if something is public or private, we put this underscore over here. So it tells the user of the class, hey, this is meant to be private. At most, like, read from it, but don't change it or else it might mess things up. So in fact, we shouldn't really be using underscore mileage over here. Instead, what would be safer is we create our own function over here to get the mileage, and then we do something like vehicle.getMileage, like this example. So let's print this out again, and you can see how the vehicle mileage is 100. And that's because we are now using this function to get the mileage from the class. So usually you don't want to access or read anything that has like an underscore in it because that's unsafe. So that's just there for your knowledge. So if you see an underscore, you know what that means. Congrats, you finally know all of the beginner concepts there are to know about Python. In the next video, we're just going to review some things and do some leak code problems. Anyways, until next time.